Alright, everybody, happy Halloween and welcome to another episode of the Key to Games podcast here on Game Wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. I am Josh Blaser, and we are back after weeks of illnesses and everyone just feeling not their best. But hopefully, we'll get through today's episode without anyone losing their voice. So, joining me, my co host, indie game developer currently working on the game Samurai Pig, Joshua Reyes. How are you feeling?
Feeling great. Yeah, I was down for a little bit, like 2 weeks, almost 3 weeks. But this is the best I've been feeling in a while, so I'm ready to go. Feeling the spooky vibes.
Hmm?
Getting a lot of work, even though I was sick, still getting a ton of work done on the games. And what have you been doing, Josh? Busy.
Yep, I am just about done with the manuscript for the next book on deck builders. All that's really left now is to finalize the cover art and get all the image sourcing, which is its own
Rock and roll.
personal horror show right
Yeah.
there.
Awesome, man. Well, congrats on that.
Thank you. And of course, channel continues to grow. I think we're at what, like 92, 9,300 subscribers. Again, it's been so busy this week. I haven't really had a chance to check.
93.4 right now.
We're getting there.
Yeah.
But we shall see how long that takes. So, with that said, however, we have our topic for this week, and that is going to be talking about horror, as we are now, as of this stream, 2 days out from Halloween. And horror and video games is a very interesting topic. It's the subject of, I think, was my fourth book. So if you're interested in horror gameplay and building a horror game, definitely check that one out. But I guess I can certainly rant and rave about horror until the undead cows come home. So for you, like, what is like your opinion, or like, what are your thoughts on like horror games and horror design?
Man, horror is like a very special like niche in game dev. And we each one is kind of niched out, right? But horror is like really special. You have to get a lot of things right for it to work. And there's a lot of cliches and things that are reused. So it's hard to get like a really not only just to getting a game done, right? Getting a video game done is a miracle in itself, but getting like a horror game done is like a double miracle, and the trifecta would be a successful horror game. So yeah, I mean, anyone working on a horror game, mad props, mad respect for it, because they're just when you have to consider like how you're going to market it, what you're going to put in the trailer and things like that. The horror games definitely deserve a special pat on the back in that regard for sure, Josh.
Hmm. And horror is one of those genres that has seen, I think, some of the most changes in terms of its structure and design over the past
Yeah.
30 years. I mean, we can, of course, talk about going from 2D to 3D with platformers, RPGs, but horror itself, it's such a very tricky genre, as you said, that it makes it very hard, I think, put in words what makes it work and what makes it doesn't work. And I just put up a post this past week about kind of my issues with independent horror, and we'll be certainly talking about that over the next however long this stream is going to be. But horror in of itself has really changed from the original, I think, template of it. If we go back to the era of Resident Evil, Alone in the Dark, and Silent Hill, where they were very much positioned as adventure games where you can also fight. So they're very puzzle filled, and everyone remembers that just evil, like matching like the tiles in Silent Hill 2 puzzle,
Fair
having to
part.
do like the right time on the clock.
Yeah.
Uh, Resident Evil 1 with all those lovely keys after the spade key and the ace key. And of course, Alone in the Dark, which just outright would kill you if you use the wrong items. It's like, hey,
Yeah.
use this knife. Oh, it's wrong. You die.
Yeah.
Or here, read the Necronomicon. What could possibly go wrong?
Right.
And then you die.
Yeah.
And then, again, like as we saw this evolution, I talk about this in my book, we kind of enter that period of action horror. And that is like 2000, I think 2003, 2004
Yeah.
on, with, of course, RE4, Dead Space, Alan Wake, Evil Within, and again, there were just so
Dying
many.
Light was in there, or that was later?
Which one?
Was Dying Light. Dying Light was later, right?
I think that was like 20. I want to say 2010. I don't remember when, but it would. I think fall into that vein. And
Yeah.
hello, Emerson and Amanda in chat.
Amanda,
Happy
welcome,
Halloween
welcome.
to you.
Happy Halloween.
So I guess my next question for you and for the chat is, what are your thoughts on kind of when we had that shift into action horror? Because the speaking about Resident Evil, it was announced this past week, and that's one of the funny things. Is like we were originally going to do like bad games, but then we kind of missed last week, so we went to horror. And like this whole last week was just like nothing but horror announcements. There was the Resident Evil 2, no, I'm sorry, Resident Evil 4 remake. We had Signalis release. We had Scorn last week. What was that? Puppet Combo just released another game, and yes, we are only talking about Puppet Combo in the at some point today. World of Horror got an update today. Lone Survivor is getting remastered in like 2 days. So I mean, in like we had like nothing horror late for like the first 25 days of this month, and then we got hit with all the horror in the last
Really
week.
good timing, though. I
Yeah.
mean, that's the best timing for it.
So, what do you think about like when we saw this push into action horror in the 2000s and pretty much like it lasted for like when we talk about mainstream horror, I think up until like
Wow.
2014,
Yeah.
2015 was when that era started to die out.
Yeah. When do you think it's actually, side note, when do you think it died out? Like Last of Us maybe was kind of like the
Yeah.
last one, maybe.
I would say Last of Us or Resident Evil Revelations. I think that was like the
Revelation,
last in
yeah.
terms of like mainstream horror. Again, we
Yeah.
gotta clarify that before we get everyone coming after us. And hello,
But
Joe.
yeah, hello, hey Joe. Yeah, but definitely, like, I mean, it was good, the evolution that we're going to have. We're going to have to switch to some type of action based, like, of course, like the easiest way to go with a, when you're making a 3D game is, of course, like a shooter or some type of action. So, of course, those two are going to be married together. It was like only the natural evolution. And for me, like that was a good time of for games. Like I think it was like one of the little golden eras for horror games. Like really big mainstream, got a lot of people into it for a short period of time because usually it just kind of goes back into like niche, like during its peaks and valleys.
Yeah. And before I forget, I completely glossed over the fact we had this like massive Silent Hill reveal over the
Yeah,
last week as well. There's I think two new games. There's going to be the Silent Hill 2 remake by Bloober Team, which I know a lot of people aren't exactly jumping for joy over that one. And then there's some new games being announced. So I mean, again, like we had this huge push, but with action horror in particular, this is when we saw this huge, or we saw this major shift in terms of what horror meant from AAA. And I still love Resident Evil 4. I think it's still one of my all-time favorites. But it you can't ignore the fact that it really influenced what horror became from like 2004 on for the
yeah, for
industry.
a while. Pretty much like set the standard of what it was for a long time. Yeah, definitely. I think even to this day, like it's a pretty good formula to go with if you're gonna make a horror. So yeah.
And for me, like I liked Resident Evil 4, but I didn't really feel like it was scary. And again, like for me, it's a very hard
Yeah.
metric these days to figure out what will scare me. Like,
Yeah, I don't think I was scared at all. I was just like, this is a really good shooty zombie
mhm,
game. Like I never it wasn't it was still considered right. Like I mean, some depending on I guess your squeamish level, but yeah, it totally was not. I think like Resident Evil 1 was more scary to me than 4. Like
mhm.
just the voice acting probably scared me more than anything.
Yep. And like we saw this with a lot of the action-based games are just trying to overwhelm the player. And it just got to the point where I got tired of kind of mainstream horror at that point. If you remember with was it Resident Evil 6? Yeah, it was 6.
Yeah,
Like
6.
that's the one we just had like I remember just like Chris Redfield like snapping necks, Leon was doing wrestling moves.
That's right. That's
I mean,
right.
it was a fun game to play for multiplayer. I played that with Juan on stream and we really enjoyed it, but it doesn't really fit the horror theme at that point.
Yeah, for sure. No, Resident Evil 6 definitely jumped the shark on that one. I couldn't get too far into it. It had some really good I know they were pushing like some co-op, so like it was like just another I think it was like a really hyped up Resident Evil 4 with no soul
Hmm.
kind of thing as if I was Gonna phrase it, but sure. Yeah, some of the wrestling moves were interesting though. So
Yeah, and to Joe's comment, not yet, but we still don't know how much they can mess things up. Well, again, it's going to be very interesting to see. Yeah, Dead Space was good, and I think that is one of the bigger issues. I think to Pony's comment about horror is that just like when it comes to movies and TV, it's very
yeah,
hard to do. What's it? Not annualize. When it's like a franchise or yeah, like there's an actual term for it. Serialize. There we go. A serialized horror is very hard to do right, as we've seen with Nightmare on Elm Street, Hellraiser, Friday the 13th, and so on. That the first time you witness it, yeah, it's scary and new. The 15th time you witness it, okay. And we all remember, or we all know just how the quality of Hellraiser has a kind
this
of peaked and
increased.
valley. Oh yeah, of
Oh my god.
course. Hellraiser 5 is everyone's favorite, I know.
Peak man, peak Hellraiser for sure. But yeah, see that's another issue. That's what I say that like comedy. I think comedy is probably worse. Like I would not even don't get me on making, but a horror is like about in that same vein, just in difficulty, right? Let's just say you get lucky and you make a good like horror game, like for example Resident Evil, which you've been talking about. How do you
Mm-hmm.
sequelize that or like go forward with it when you've kind of already let like you have the trailer and the trailer kind of reveals everything about it. If you play the game, you kind of know everything about it, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
then where do you go from there? Usually, I don't know, maybe creating another universe, but that's a whole nother scenario, and that's again more difficult than going with what you already have, right?
Mm-hmm. And every game compounds, the lore you have to deal with, the
Yeah.
enemies, and it becomes very hard to keep these franchises interesting. Sequel after sequel, you'll make a five. Yeah, I know, Joe. Don't worry, I'm sure we'll get a Resident Evil 5 remake in like the next 4 or 5 years at this rate. And
Resident Evil 8. It's already in the works right now.
mm-hmm. And Resident Evil 8 got its a DLC update this past
Yeah.
week as well, so now there's even more Resident Evil.
Wow.
And yeah, like it's always that challenge of what do you do to keep horror going?
Yeah.
Because even with some of the bigger successes like Dead Space and the Evil Within, they still like their sequels were kind of more and more shifting away from what made the
Yeah.
originals work.
Yeah, definitely. Like you could say they were almost completely. I
Hmm.
don't know the studio lineage of them or what happened. I think it was the same studios, right? But like the difference between one and two and Dead Space, you could tell they were like, it was like I don't even want to be horror anymore. Like they were really pulling away from it pretty hard. And it's like, how do you keep going with horror and reinvent it again? It's like you really have to you have to use really creative ways, psychological ways, just a lot of different techniques that aren't really used in
Hmm.
what's the core gameplay loop of your horror game going to be like that will keep you engaged and scared and also not bored or frustrated. That's a real tightrope to walk, Josh.
Yeah, and when we talk about as we get into more indie horror, probably at some point, I definitely want to touch more on the idea of like roguelike elements when it comes
Yeah,
to horror, as that was I think one of the
sure.
major kind of like or one of the more hidden aspects that we're seeing from a lot of indie horror or like the last 4 to 5 years. And again, that's kind of
Yeah.
been like where Public Combo has really specialized in. And yeah, to Mr. Game and Chat with FNAF, like that, like FNAF, Amnesia, and even Gone Home really
Gone home.
kind of signaled indie horror. Like those are
Yeah.
the games I think a lot of people. Oh, and Outlast. Outlast I think came a little bit later,
Outlast.
but
Yeah. Hiding in the closet. Oh man.
yeah. But before we get to indie horror, to kind of stay on action horror for a little bit longer, I think the problem that we had was that there was just this complete abandonment of the survival or the exploration when it came to horror and mainstream. It was just more along the lines of just give the player all the guns they need and,
Guns and
shoot your way.
gore. Yeah, more guns and gore basically like as the scares, gore, and guns basically is where it ended up for quite a bit.
Hmm. And then with that, we can now at least start to begin touching on indie horror. Or we should probably mention, of course, PT. Like, PT is for a lot of people, like, the mythical horror game.
Yeah.
And, of course, there's spoiler warnings on a game that's about a decade old at this point, I think. But PT was supposed to be the hidden reveal of Silent Hills. The Hideo Kojima, Guillermo del Toro, with Norman Reedus in it as sequel to Silent Hill. And a lot of horror fans, I think we still kind of wake up at night thinking about what
Yeah.
could have been if that game actually came out the door.
When we were getting preparing for the podcast, and I wrote down PT on my list, and I just had a pain. I was just like, oh, it was, just that mythical unicorn of a game, just that's there. And then I know there's some lucky people that still have it on their PlayStations. They haven't updated it or anything, so they can still play it. So
Yep, and PT and I think like Japanese horror is a very interesting subset as we talk about when it comes to horror games, because there were a lot of games from Japanese developers for like the PlayStation 2, I think all the way into like the PlayStation 3, PlayStation 4 era, that were trying to really, I think, keep survival horror alive. Fatal Frame is one of my favorites.
frame, yeah,
Siren is another one. I don't know who here has played Siren, but that
Right here.
is
right here.
Thank you. There we go. But yeah, like Siren, I think is a really good example when we start to see this element of difficulty when it
Yeah.
comes to horror. And when we talk about Puppet Combo in the next few minutes, it will definitely come up again. But there, and Haunting Ground, Rule of Rose. I'm really showing my older survival horror roots with those two games. Clock Tower as well. Like, there's a lot of Japanese-based horror games that really kind of kept the survival side of
Did you
things.
ever play D, the old that?
Yes.
Yes, right on, man.
Never played the second one though, but I did play
Okay.
the original.
Right on.
But yeah,
I was hoping, when I was asking you, I was like, I hope I'm not going to be met with crickets, but awesome.
there we go. Yeah. But yeah, like we saw from Japanese developers, like into the PlayStation 2 and beyond era, that they were still trying to do more in terms of weakening the player, or it wasn't going to be pure action. And these games, for a lot of them, got really hard. Like, these are those games where, hey, you walk into the room, the guy sees you, well, I hope you can get away, because otherwise, yep, you're dead. Like, you will just one-shot.
Yeah. Yeah, I got like locked. I got in Fatal Frame 1 or 2, and I got locked in a boss with not enough film, and I was toward the end, and I just messed it.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Limited resources. That's another... Yeah. I think that's one of the reasons why we saw the switch to action horror. I think someone just finally got tired of running out of shotgun rounds for a boss. So here, just take the minigun and use that.
There we go. I think so. Played well though. Like resource management, like was like definitely something that I know many people enjoyed, and like some of the older games, like it's a part of the that's where survival games exist, like managing your things and stuff like that. So it's definitely cool. But I can definitely see some people, some CEOs or some team leads being, you know what, let's give them the minigun and get going here.
Mm-hmm. And what's interesting, one game we didn't mention yet that I think a lot of people tend to forget about is Doom 3. Doom 3 was kind of like id Software attempt at making a first-person shooter horror game.
Yeah.
And it's one of those games that in a very odd sense, it's looked at, I think, more favorably now than it did when it was first released. And this... we're not careful, we'll get on this whole, marketing and brand perception of your game chat here. But it really is a good example of that. That when people think of Doom, they don't think of walking slowly with a flashlight and not be able to see, 3 feet in front of you. They think, again, rip and tear.
Yeah, they definitely went hard on that flashlight tech in that game for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was definitely a game, and I really like how they've started going back and looking at it and analyzing how it's an excellent game. Really was a really good game, and very unique for its time.
Mm-hmm. But as we enter the 2010s, this is when we kind of saw this downplay of mainstream horror. And it's kind of ironic that we see all these people this month saying, horror is finally back. I can't believe horror came back at long last. And we're just sitting here going, it never left. Like we've been playing
But
horror games for the past decade, just people didn't notice it.
yeah,
And as we got into the 20, I think it was like early 2010s, there was that one last push. Like I think like the two games that really cemented what would become indie horror would be Amnesia and Alien Isolation. Like these are
Alien
those two
Annihilation.
games that
Yeah,
they really push this idea of you cannot fight. Like if action horror was the pushback against survival horror, indie horror was the pushback against action horror.
yeah. Alien Isolation. Special shout out for like the AI design in that game. I think that's like one of the like just a masterpiece. Uh Horror game, just the whole way it's designed, the way
Mm-hmm.
it makes you feel, just very psychological. I'm a big fan of that one.
Yeah,
Big fan of that.
I do feel that it's not one of my favorite horror games because of the difficulties surrounding it.
Yeah,
And when we talk more about kind of puppet combo and kind of modern horror later on, remind me to bring back up Alien Isolation there. And
yeah,
it,
Fear AI also was excellent.
yeah,
Yeah.
Fear was again another really solid game. I
Wow.
don't know if I would throw it in horror, but
Yeah.
it really walks that line. Like the spooky sections are spooky, but you're in no danger. But the
Yeah.
enemy AI, like I would love to have seen someone take like Fear's AI and put that into like a survival horror or even into like a Condemned. And
Definitely.
Condemned
Condemned.
is one of my all-time favorites. I
Yeah.
love how that game, pushes you into like very survival-esque combat. Like it's not combat where you're supposed to feel powerful. And I talked about this in my horror design post and in Scorn that combat in these games is meant to be very meaty. It's supposed to be something that you're not supposed to be feeling powerful when you do it. And I think again, as you were talking about earlier, with like the pacing and gameplay of horror, it's very hard to do combat that works well in horror because either it's so floaty or so horrible to use that it just feels bad, or it's I have the shotgun, I can kill anything in one hit. Why should I be scared now?
Yeah, it's definitely hard to walk. Like you're either Superman or you're so weak. So it's like hard to find the line that works for it. Ghosts and Goblins is definitely a horror game. Yes.
For your wallet if you
For
play in
your
the
wallet.
arcade.
Only in the arcade. If you bought it once for
Hmm.
your time management, that's a bad time.
Ooh, I do not remember that one, Joe, but it's been a long time since I played Condemned 2.
Condemned 2. Wow. We should check that out. Maybe you should stream it, Josh.
Yeah, if it ever comes to PC, unfortunately, it's such a. Or we gotta go the other way, I
We'll
guess.
go the other route.
Yeah.
Go the other route.
And to get back to kind of like indie horror, kind of the origins of it, with Amnesia, Gone Home, and then of course FNAF and Outlast came later, we saw this just complete, no pun intended, condemned, just condemnation, or I can't even pronounce it right now, my mouth is dry there, of action in horror. That when we got to the independent scene, it was just this idea of no combat, that you had no real means of surviving. It was just all kind of this high and seek, cat and mouse kind of gameplay. And while I respect that, I just felt it made a lot of horror way too linear.
It's like
And
stealth game with ghosts.
there we go. Uh, yeah, and Senua's sacrifice, they never actually did that with the the Hellblade, whatever it was called. That your saves were never really deleted, or there's never any real danger.
Fun.
Yes, that one.
Yeah.
Never played that one on stream, but I did play on my own. Thought it was interesting, but it kind of skirted that line of like kind of like walking simulator or
It was too walking simulator for me, and it was just I got too lost in the walking simulator, and then the rewards of the it was cool. There were some really cool parts. The wife
Mhm.
who enjoyed it, but I didn't get to finish it though.
Yeah.
You liked it? Pony liked it. Okay. What did you think, Josh?
I thought it was
Hellblade.
okay.
Yeah.
A lot of really great imagery and like the voices in the head, I think, was a
Yeah,
really nice touch.
that was a nice touch for sure. Very unique. Definitely
Hmm.
unique touch on that.
But I think as we got into the 2010s and we saw this rise of combat-less horror, I think this is where a lot of horror games in the past decade kind of lost it for me. And there have been, again, like when it comes to independent space, there's like I think like an infinite amount of horror games, especially if we count kind of the RPG Maker style, the itch.io games. There is a ton of indie horror, but they've all followed the same beat. And I think in a way it's kind of that the curse of Resident Evil that or even just the curse of AAA horror. That Resident Evil 1 defined horror, and so we saw everyone try to copy that. Then everyone copied Resident Evil 4. And then we got to PT, that a lot of people, I think, took PT literally. That it's a horror game that you have no direct interaction with, so that's what we're going to base our entire horror design on for the next decade. And I still, again, like, returning to Silent Hills, Hideo Kojima and Guillermo del Toro, I would have loved to have seen what they would have done with survival horror.
My gosh, we got what was the walking game instead?
Death Stranding.
Dead Stranding
Or Dead
instead.
Stranding, yeah.
Yeah, Dead Stranding. Yeah, and I mean, my word, like I think everybody was salivating for that. I think like all horror fans were waiting for something like that. Sadly, never will see that. Yeah.
Hmm. But don't worry, you'll get the Bloober Team Silent Hill 2. It'll be
Yeah.
just the same.
Oh, good.
As every horror fan right now just felt the knife go into their heart with that
Good.
one.
Good. I bought the last Silent Hill remaster or remake. I can't remember now what it was. It was a while back, and I was
Yeah.
very disappointed with it.
Yep,
So
and
I'm ready
again,
for it again.
there you go. You're ready for disappointment squared.
Yeah.
And this, I think, is again that challenge of horror. And going back to what Pony was saying with the Hat in Time, that horror needs gameplay. It needs this kind of how the player's being manipulated into it. If there is no sense of uniqueness, like, and this again is where we saw this issue with a lot of indie horror, that it all kind of just borrowed the same tricks
Yeah.
over and over and
Cliches,
over
things
again.
used over and over again. What Pony mentioned right there, what he liked about
Hmm.
Hellblade was it using audio hints, right? So it
Hmm.
used like audio something different, right? And that's just another way. You have to be really unique with horror. Again, I envy or not, I do not envy the ones working on horror games because you really have to find creative ways to like get inside people's heads and to keep them along. And so
Yeah. And that is very hard to sustain
yeah.
over
Oh
how many minutes, hours, or even sequels of your
yeah.
franchise. The first
More than
time,
one
again,
game.
yeah, the first time you get jumped by a dog in Resident Evil is a very scary moment. That caused a lot of people to have heart attacks back in 1996. The 50th time we see that in a horror game, not so much. And
Yeah.
again, to Pony's comment about jump scares, that how many developers have copied the same structure? There you go. Uh, how many people have copied the same structure of FNAF or
Yeah.
Amnesia in terms of
Yeah.
horror the past decade? And
Yeah.
the problem is that it doesn't give long lasting horror. And here's my hill I'm going to die on when it comes to horror. Jump scares is not horror, it's more of
Yeah.
a haunted house.
Yeah.
And so many developers have embraced jump scares as the be all end all of what they want to do with horror.
I was kind of fell down the rabbit hole. First, this is just a tangent, but I kind of fell down the rabbit hole watching some of those backrooms
Mm.
videos, and and every one of them just went to like a jump scare, and I was like, why are you, why does anyone think like a jump scare works for anyone anymore? And or that any like no one watches a jump scare and we're like, oh yeah, that's what I needed. I just needed a jump scare. I don't think anybody has ever gotten a jump scare and be like, I need more of that. So
Hmm.
just food for thought there. And he did.
Yep, and a lot of that I think just came with this rise of kind of the YouTuber and streamer audiences for horror, where everyone has to have like the shock reaction,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
they put like their like on the thumbnail for
We'll redo the thumbnail, Joshua.
yeah. There you go. That will be the thumbnail for next week's show right there. And you have to do very different things when you want horror to work. And I think it's why some of the more successful takes on horror aren't necessarily like, you know, dialed up to 11 in terms of terror. Like
Yeah,
it's spooky all the time. There's jump scare after jump scare, blood, guts, and gore everywhere. Like, you really need to have a fine hand or a deft touch when it comes to making horror work.
like go just like for example, like the way you're talking, Gone Home is like a good example of
Mm-hmm.
that. Like I don't know why I was spooked out the whole time, and then like the big reveal, like I didn't know, and then the big reveal of it is not even like anyway. I'm not going to spoil it. Go play it.
Mm-hmm.
But the way that it was paced out was just a really good example of that, right? How to do that.
Yep, and there you go, Pony. Yeah, and like Little Nightmares is another really good example. Like, Little Nightmares is not a full-on horror game. It's not designed to be like in the same crowd as an Outlast or an Amnesia, but it does a great job of presenting that mood. And good mood, good environmental design, those are essential when it comes to horror. And I think that's something that a lot of indie developers have lost over the last decade is this idea that the environment needs to be both interesting and it also needs to lend into the gameplay. And
Right.
it has to be beyond just, hiding behind a closet or going underneath, the same stock bed asset that's used in every single room.
Gosh, I was trying to play a few. I was like playing like the PS1 Haunted demo disc before the to get
Hmm.
in the mood, and that was all I was doing. I was crawling underneath stock bed assets, and I was like, no.
Hey, Chris,
Car.
how are you doing?
Hey, Chris,
Yeah,
welcome, my friend.
and I think this is why, like, the horror games that worked for me over the past decade were the ones that really tried to do something legitimately different. Even
Yeah,
if I didn't end up liking them or disliking them, they still at least were trying to do something that no one else has done before. We did our play of Yuppie Psycho again on stream, and I really like Yuppie Psycho. It's not full on horror, again, like a lot of the games we mentioned, but it has that very unique aesthetic of kind of like 90s corporate hell and working in a business like that. Or even again, like going to something like World of Horror, which is more, 1 bit Junji Ito style.
yeah. Like Pony says, there's a fine line between horrific and goofy, and like it's the same thing for comedy games too. Like
Mm-hmm.
both of them are really difficult to do.
Ooh. Well, happy birthday to Leona, and
Leona, happy
hopefully
birthday, Leona.
good luck with the tire there too. And for a lot of the horror games, and I guess I didn't ask your thoughts on this. I want to ask Chad as well. Combatless horror. What are your thoughts on that from a design perspective?
Man, if it's written well and if it makes sense, it's fun. I do not like them. I'd probably put them like on a lower tier. I prefer a little more interactivity in my horror games to at least to be able to defend myself. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
not sure why I would be in a situation where I couldn't defend myself in a horror game. So right, so it kind of puts me out. But some of them are fine. Some, like what was it? Is it one of sometimes it can just be frustrating, right? When all you're doing again is just like hiding or like going under the stock bed asset or going into the stock locker over and over again, and it's the same AI loop. It can get annoying, but done right and well, I think it can really work. You know what I mean? For in like certain circumstances. Me though, it's just me. I would prefer combat always. Some type of some, even if it's just like with my flashlight or something, just something to be able to defend myself.
That is a great story, because I hope you told him about game wisdom. Because if you can find a mechanic who knows Metroidvanias, that is a That is a great combination right there. Yeah, and like for me again, there has to be some element of interactivity that I need to have some or attempt
Yeah,
to have some control over the situation. It's one of the reasons
yeah,
again why Condemned worked so well for me is that you are in that very weak position in Condemned, but you're still forced to fight. You're still supposed to grab, whatever miscellaneous object around you and try to beat someone up with it. And I have a new rule that if I play a horror game and there are literally weapons all over the place and I can't pick them up, I am just going to give that like a 0 out of 10. Like, that is just failure
seriously.
right there. Like,
That is, yeah, man. That's like one of the most, yeah, that's zero for sure. That's a zero. Hey,
yeah,
man, Manhunt, Manhunt,
yeah. Do we consider Manhunt to be horror or is that more
like a
stealth?
like a B horror stealth.
Yeah. I like Manhunt. I know, like,
Yeah,
I never played the sequel, the one that I think got an
it was,
adults only rating, but the first one I thought had a
yeah,
very interesting take on things.
yeah. But to me, it was amazing. I loved it. The second one I never got to play. I think because of the rating also. I also got bad reviews. But the first one was kind of amazing to me.
That's good, Chris. You should play Resident Evil 2 Remaster, but wait, they
Yeah.
save infinite ammo. You have to, I think, like, S rank the game first. And for a lot of, like, as we got into the 2010s with more indie horror, going, like, combat lists, again, I think this is a really good time to mention FNAF and Outlast.
Yeah.
FNAF, there you go. FNAF, Five Nights at Freddy's is just a weird. Like, I think when we look back at that, it's one of those, like, perfect timings
Yeah.
for their games. Like, Path of Exile to Diablo 3 failing. Like, FNAF came out right in that era where AAA was saying, horror's not viable anymore, we don't want to make it. The independent scene was just starting to ramp up with Amnesia and Gone Home, and it just kind of it hit that, like, I think, like, perfect zeitgeist moment
Yeah.
for the genre.
Yeah, it was quite amazing. I couldn't believe it. And like the first time I actually played it, I was like, this is the game? I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I I couldn't believe I wasn't really sure. I was kind of confused for a little bit what the actual game was or how it was the game. But yeah, it was perfect timing for it.
That's my response to a lot of, like, the indie horror games I play these days. Like, wait, this is the game that everyone's talking about? Like, this is what's scaring them? But yeah,
For
like,
sure.
I think back to, I think it was Joe who said this way back at the start about, or no, it was Mr. Game and Chat, I believe it said, about kind of, oh yeah, the mystery and the lore. Like, it's such a weird game. I think this is something that I'm not sure if this is, like, enough of a on point for today, but I want to at least touch on it here. This idea that a lot of indie horror really became, I think, obsessed with the franchise around the horror game. Like, not so much the actual gameplay itself. And when we look at FNAF, that's a really good example of this. That for a lot of people, when you bring up Five Nights at Freddy's, you're probably thinking of all the lore, all the game theory videos that have been released, the fact that there are books and novels and kids' toys, which that
Yeah.
last one makes very little sense to me, but yes, there are. Like, when at my old allergy doctor, kids were doing, like, coloring books of FNAF characters and posing on the wall. I'm just sitting there going, what? What?
What?
Why? Why do kids know about Five Nights at Freddy's?
Wild. Yeah, I would have my cousins come over and they're like freaking out about Five Nights at Freddy's. What? What's going on? Everybody's freaking out.
Mm-hmm. And we've been seeing this kind of. I think this kind of goes back to this era of the YouTuber streamer culture around
Yeah.
horror. That
Yeah.
when a horror game, like, it's no longer the goal to make a good horror game. The goal is to get a horror game that, Markiplier or PewDiePie or pick any of the major YouTuber streamers who play horror games, get them to play it, so then everyone hears about it, and then we can sell the merchandising, and then we can, do this whole, franchise around it. Oh yeah, and House is a really good one. When we talk about like original horror, I really enjoyed House, which is also incredibly hard to find on Steam because the name is so nondescript that it's hard to search for it.
House, the video game.
Mm-hmm. And again, like when we look at stuff like what was it? I can't believe I forget the name of it. The one about the animation studio, the horror and like they're all the anime characters are trying to kill you. Has a lot to do with ink. I'm sure someone's already. I'm sure five people are typing.
Danganronpa?
What was it?
Danganronpa?
No, this is from the independent side. Oh, what was the name of it? Alright, someone's gonna post it. No, not Death Note. Or no, not that one. Oh, come on. Someone here has to know which one I'm talking
High
about.
school horror.
There is, I think, a few of those on Steam.
Yeah, definitely.
Sexy horror. Doki Doki, I think, is another one that lends itself into, again, this idea that horror has to hit you unexpectedly in order for it to work. And while I'm trying, I'll look up the link to House for Joe.
I only found House Flipper. I can't. I couldn't find it.
Yeah, but while I'm doing this, like Daniel Mullins is another really good example of hiding horror. If you remember Pony Island as a really good example of that.
Classic, man.
And again, like when the person doesn't expect horror, that's when it's at its worst, or I should say at its best, for getting them freaked out. Again, it's why Fatal Frame I think does a really good job of that. I always tell the story, but I love when they started like throwing the ghosts to like pop up in the safe zones in Fatal Frame 3. That got me. I remember the first time I played that, or I still love this moment. I was playing it at a GameStop. Oh, and no one. Again, I had the speakers on, so no one else heard it, and I got jump scare. I just like jumped like 3 feet back in the middle of GameStop and scared everyone in the place.
Yeah, man, that was definitely cool. I mean, and that's how you do it. Subvert rules or ideas, and that is like it's something unique, and that's how you do it. And like that's to you one of the most memorable things, right?
Mm-hmm.
From like Fatal Frame 3, and it's like just subverting something, changing something. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. And again, you have to surprise the player, and it's why a lot of horror games. Oh, I looked it up. It's Bendy and the Ink Machine. It's the one that I was thinking about earlier. But yeah, you need to be able to do something different. Again, like you said, like it can't just be the same jump scare over and over again. And to get back to the point about this whole like franchising things, it is something that I said in my piece I wrote that I feel that the rise of YouTuber and streamer for horror, I think that's both been a blessing and a downfall in a lot of cases of horror design. Because you're not really designing the game to scare someone. You're designing it to get them to make that, face, or, just start, like, laughing and crying on stream, so you can then use that for a sizzle reel or a teaser.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it doesn't really lend itself to true horror. I've said this before, but I still have my dream horror game that I want to make, and if I ever get to make that one, I think it may put a few YouTubers and streamers in the hospital. When I think about like scary horror and what I want to do with it, it is not going to be a jump scare. And if something does scare you, it's going to try and attack you at the same time. Let's see.
So Chris says right there is horror genre that devs fail to fully understand, consider player psychology, and I would say 100. I think okay, so I believe that like a lot of indie devs, and this is from a lot of horror indie games that I've seen, basically think that it's you get some assets together, you get some chairs, some matchbooks, some flashlights, and like some paper and scrolling, and you go around in a house and you gotta be spooked out. And that's not how what that's not what you the you need to like players want to play a horror game for a reason. And again, I'm gonna repeat it, it's not for a jump scare, right? Like that is the one thing that's people are gonna roll their eyes back and uninstall it as soon as they get the first jump scare. So like it has to be something like psychological, something unique, something to go along. Like, and again, I'm gonna bring up Gone Home. So like there was a reason that I kept going along in the story, right? Like I was like, there's something creepy. I'm not sure what's creepy, but something feels creepy. And I just kept going and like reading and investigating, but it kept me going along the entire ride. And there was never once anything that jumped out at me or scared me in the entire game. But yet it was a horror. Like I was suspenseful and like worried and tense for some unknown reason, right? So being able to subvert the unknown, or it definitely, like, that's the thing, that's the difficult part about horror, is the psychological aspects of it, and they have to be considered. It's not like mechanics and things like that. There's very important things about lore and story, or where you're at, your setting, the atmosphere,
Mm-hmm.
audio, sound. All of that has to go together, and it has to work and be considered, Josh.
Yeah, and again, like two ponies comment about human psychology and player psychology. It's very much about putting the player into that state of unease. And again, something that I talked about in my post, that horror, and it's what Josh just said, horror is not about the jump scare. It's not about the set piece. It's about the stuff that happens in between. It's that idea, like, as you were saying, going home, wandering around this house where, everything is strewn about, the lights aren't working, what is going on here? Why am I in this place? It's about that sense of what is happening, and letting the player guess, let the player be their own worst enemy. So the player's just saying, oh god,
Yeah.
this wall, they're gonna come at me, and then you walk by and then nothing's there, and they're like, oh god, if it's not there, then it must be over there. But no, maybe it's up here. And the player's just constantly betraying themselves
Yeah.
in terms of what horror is. And then when that jump scare happens, and it is just completely out of the blue, and it's not just, and again, I'm going to say this, having a ghost pop up behind you when you pick up an item, don't do that anymore, please. It doesn't work. And but when you do it right, and again, a jump scare is meant to release tension. That's its goal. It's not there to be get your YouTuber shock face. But when the player is at that point, and this is when you know when you get someone, is that you don't even need to do a jump scare. You can just have like a random noise, or
Yeah.
the player's just so on edge, they'll just like
Yeah.
fire their weapon by accident.
Yeah, you literally don't have to like scare again, you can pit the player against themselves, right? The mind, again, it's psychological, right? So
Mm-hmm.
pitting the mind against itself, making the player fear something. What am I fearing? Fearing the unknown, right? And instead of showing them something and they know, okay, so it's a ghost that I'm supposed to fear, I'm not so scared anymore. But if you
Mm-hmm.
don't know, right? And if you don't know and you can somehow bring them along through the entire journey to the end, and again, the end doesn't even have to be scary. It could just be like, wow, that was really scary when I found out that there's this really cool painting or whatever. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
matter, right? Like just the journey alone. Like people don't, people get on. Why do people get on roller coasters? Like it's like for the journey, I would suppose, right? It's not
Mm-hmm.
like for the one peak. It's for the entire ride.
Yep, and to Nobody's comment, that yeah, like it's about creating this environment where different things can happen. You don't want the player to be like, oh look, it's a zombie. It's going to respond the same way as 75 other zombies. I mean, this was again that one failing of Dead Space. That Dead Space, the first time you run into a necromorph, it is scary, and why the heck is this thing have arms and claws in places where there shouldn't be arms and claws? But then you're locked into a room with five of them. And then you're locked into another room. And then another room. And then you're just like, okay, it's a big empty space. I'm sure nothing's going to, pop out of the grate this time. And then you just get completely tired of it. And yeah, you need to have, again, like the roller coaster is a really good analogy. That there has to be that build up and then the release.
Yep.
And there always has to be a release. That's again the other issue. Some games will just say, we're going to do no jump scares, there's no horror. And then you're just like, well, is something going to happen? Hello, is anyone there? And then the player just like kind of calms down their own, and then they're never
Yeah.
going to feel emotionally attached ever again.
Right. Right. Like I literally, again, I was playing a couple to get in the mood before the stream. One of them, I picked up a key, and then behind me something popped up. I said, "Man," and I uninstalled it so that they committed the first sin. And then another one, I got it. I got so like I calmed down. Like I got at first it seemed neat. I think it was Bloody
Mhm.
Janitor or something I was playing. And so I was walking around and the ambiance was great, seemed really neat, but I got so frustrated because I didn't know where to go and then eventually start calming down, right? And it's like because not everything's clear in level design or stuff like that. I don't know how much you've experienced that.
Oh, yes, that was actually going to be my next point about the
Yeah.
gameplay. That
Yeah.
getting back to player psychology and human psychology, levels and environmental design have to be on point. I think again, there's this misconception from a lot of indie developers that environmental design is just here's 20 random rooms, tables and chairs, and all this stuff all over the place, and that makes the game scary. But again, the
Makes it
problem,
cumbersome and
yeah,
you're gonna bump into the chairs or do I pick them up? And anyway, continue.
yep, and you do not want your gameplay to be frustrating.
Yeah.
That is the killer for me when it comes to horror, even more than jump scares. That if your game is hard to control, and again, there's a difference between a very grounded, very meaty combat or gameplay, and very cumbersome, very annoying gameplay. If
Yeah.
your game is annoying to play to me, that ruins horror. Like that is
Yeah.
the horror killer because then I get annoyed. And
Yeah.
once I get annoyed at your game, all the
It's over, man.
ghosts and jump scares doesn't mean the world. I'm still just annoyed. And I've played several indie horror games that have done just that. There is that one, what was it, Median of Horror? Something like that. Let me see if I can look it up. I may have gotten it for free at some point. Huh. I thought I got that one for free, unless I'm thinking of a different name. That there was this like fuse puzzle that you're supposed to mess with the different fuses, but I had
Love them.
no idea what the heck was going on.
Love
And
fuse puzzles.
oh yes, how about that puzzle from Scorn where you have to like hit the button and it moves the other things around? And don't forget about Towers of Annoy, everyone's
Yeah.
favorite puzzle structure of all time. But by the point that I was just so frustrated, I gave up on that game. And again, this takes me back to this point about difficulty and cumbersome gameplay. That if the player is fighting the game more than they're following what's going on or being, scared or unnerved, that's also a failure of horror. And again, I think this is where we get to the issue of or going back to action horror. That in action horror, you're more concerned about how many headshots I can make, or do I have enough grenade rounds to blow up these enemies? You're not really thinking about horror at that point. Just as in some of these games, it's like, okay, I have the piece of dental floss and a monkey. I'm going to. Where do I use these items to open up this door? To then get the key. To then get the Rubik's cube. To then solve it. To then open up this thing. And then maybe we'll get to the end.
Well, then you'll get the sheet music, and then you can then you can play the tune on the piano, and then
And don't forget, you have to play that realistically. So I hope for everyone watching this, you can read music,
yeah.
and then that gives you a chemical composition that you'll then have to take back to the laboratory to then combine to a formula, and then you have to solve a math
Be
problem.
a massive boss on the way there. You
Yeah.
can't drop the chemicals. If you do, you have to start over.
Mm-hmm.
The save
Exactly.
file gets deleted.
Yeah, there you go. Did you not play Beethoven's Fifth Symphony correctly? Save file's gone.
Yeah, but like back to your point though, like the annoyance and the frustration killing, like totally killing it. Like for one, okay, and there's level design and there's environmental design.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so first level design is very important in your horror game, right? So like if I don't know where to go immediately, and your level design and your environment design does not tell me where to go, I'm immediately frustrated, right?
Yep.
So that's super important, right? And one of the reasons why it like sticks out even more is because lighting. Someone, I think Pony or something mentioned lighting earlier. So like lighting in it is like kind of lowered in like horror games. It's used for ambiance and stuff
Oh
like that,
yes.
but you need to use it like properly, right? So like level design, and then also okay, also interactions, like you like controls. We've talked about this before, but your controls should fit some type of standard schema for horror games. I know you can kind of get a little wacky and do something different, but if I don't press like E or like for interact, or if I don't press like a common interact button and it's not interacting, or it doesn't even tell me that it's
Oh
not
yes.
interactable, then I'm going to be frustrated or annoyed. So those are like things that don't usually aren't like needed to be concerned with in other games because, but in horror, it's very important, and it's very important for player retention.
Yep. And if you can't get the basics right in terms of the moment to moment,
Yeah.
general controls, it's just frustrating as all heck to do.
Yeah.
And one of the big things, like even with like things that frustrate me in horror, is when lighting is a resource. If you've played
Yeah.
anything like Outlast or any game where your lighter or your flashlight is either like part of your inventory or it has a limited consumption and then you're just left wandering around the
Yeah.
dark. It's one of the things that just really pissed me off about Amnesia.
And see, one of the things, look, one of the what's so frustrating about that is that the light is used as a key way to reveal the level design and environment. And if they take that away from you, you're no longer playing the game as intended, right? And they're like, well, you were supposed to keep your resources. I don't know where I'm supposed to go. So
Oh yes.
maybe I went down the wrong hallway and wasted all my matches, right? Because of
Oh
your poor
god,
level
yes.
design. So that's just, that's really, those are really important. Real important.
Yep, you again, like I think this is that case of developers taking the wrong lessons of resource management. The
Yeah.
resource management needs to be an active decision. Do I fight this enemy? Do I, use a healing item now or do I save it? But when you have items as being degraded or they have to be constantly consumed, it's not a choice by the player. It's can I see more than 4 feet in front of me? Or, am I playing the game like this and I can't
Yeah.
figure out what's going on? And the first time I played Outlast, I got to that point where I couldn't figure out where I was going. I wasted all my battery light. So now I'm just left wandering this massive area with no batteries, can't see anything. And it's just like, why even bother playing at this point?
Yeah. Why even play? And then you don't know where to go. You hear spooky noises. I mean, yeah,
Mhm.
why even play at that point? Exactly. Like, and then just think like there's no way, like it's really hard, like if you were gonna play or like to player test it or to like balance it in any way, because a player could go anywhere with the resource, right? If I had like a match and only so much time, I could go
Mhm.
back and forth in and out of the room or exhaust the resources looking around at books and thinking maybe I can interact with something. So like that's something really that's resource management that's like nearly almost impossible to plan correctly, right? And it's putting a lot on the player to expect them to do that, right? That's like a lot. It's like
Mhm.
make sure you're reading the facts so you know when to use the matches, otherwise you won't be able to play the game. So
Yep. And again, like that level of resource management, it doesn't really work for horror. That's when I think the mechanics are getting in the way
yeah,
of the tension. And
yeah,
to the chat, yeah, like Silent Hill 2 in particular, is still
yeah,
considered one of the best. And again, games like Silent Hill, Faith that just came out, like their World of Horror as well, they're really good examples that you don't need to have 4K graphics to make horror work. It's about, again, how do you create that mood? How do you make the player feel like there's something going on here? Elden Ring, yes. Elden Ring is definitely a survival horror game right there. And again, it's why this is a hard genre to do right. How many games, again, have we played where horror means just a jump scare? Or maybe it's just like a 20-minute short experience Then there's like a ghost pops up at like the 19-minute mark, and then we roll crits. Like it doesn't really work in terms of again good horror design.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, a churning yeah. But yeah, like again, just to go back over it again, like there needs to be a reason to go along with the ride, like more than any other, like more than most genres, because most genres, like if I'm look, I'm playing a platformer, there's a reason just to straight up play a platformer, right? I'm
Mm-hmm.
gonna check it out. I can go forward, see how it is. If it's good, I can keep playing it, right? There's a reason for it. There's not so many reasons in horror. There's a lot of reasons to push you away from playing the horror. From we were talking about the annoyance factors, the level design. Um, how much gets revealed about your trailer? Like who's playing it? Is it streamable? How well is it paced? So there's a lot of things that you can definitely muddle up in that.
Mm-hmm. And again, it's why a lot of people bounce off of horror. That if it is just, scare after scare after scare, a lot of people don't want to be scared like that. It is
No,
a
no,
very acquired taste. And again, it's why it is a very niche genre, no matter how many copies Resident Evil 7 and 8 sell, or how many
yeah,
copies the new Silent Hill games are going to do. It's still, when we talk about it, it's never going to be the same kind of big seller as a Call of Duty, or
no,
Fortnite, or a Mario
no.
game.
I literally reached out to a bunch of my dev friends earlier before the thing. I was like, "Hey, what horror game do you like?" And they're like, "Oh, I don't play horror. Like most people don't like horror, right?" So just keep that in mind. Like horror has like a huge like just genre heap like or jump to get over, like a big mountain to get over, just to get into their niche or have their niche audience, right? To break through or to like mass media even, right?
Yeah. And it's why even the best cases of horror are still going to be these niche games, no
Yeah.
matter how much you want to try and dress it up. And again, great horror is very hard to do. And it's again why a lot of developers and even consumers are still, like, I think, misled as to what makes horror work. We played a Darkwood on stream the week before. It's a very atmospheric game. It's a game where you walk into a house and all of a sudden the music starts creeping and you hear random noises. And again, it's about the player being their own worst enemy.
Hmm.
And that is incredibly hard to do right. Again, it's why we talk about human and player psychology.
Yeah.
And the whole discussion of lighting and light resources again reminds me of Alan Wake. And Alan Wake was just basically, the light is your weapon.
The
And
light is your weapon.
I
Yeah.
thought it was a really great game. We're getting an Alan Wake 2, and I've been hearing that it's going to be more along the lines of what they originally wanted to do. It's going to be more of a survival horror game. Because Alan Wake is still clearly an example of action horror. When you have
Yeah.
your Nordic rock battle on the stage, with the whole light show and pyrotechnics going off, we're not really being scared at that point.
No, not that. It's a very unique game. Very unique.
Mm-hmm. Don't want to touch horror yet. And we've seen so many like indie developers do like Lovecraftian horror, body horror, and I guess actually that's another really good point I want to ask you and ask Chad about. What do you think about when we go over the top in terms of gore and horror? Outlast 2 is a really good example. Like a lot of people have criticized Outlast 2 for just
Yeah.
being like, oh, here's a room of I can't mention it here on YouTube as they'll come down on me. But
Yeah.
here's this. And then here's a hallway of blood. And here's more things I can't mention.
I'm actually, I mean, that's horror. Like if you watch horror movies, like if you're a big fan of horror movies, that's usually where
Mm-hmm.
they go. They usually can get pretty gory,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of a part of the thing. And I don't mind it, and I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I mean, especially if you're in the genre,
Mm-hmm.
that it's all free game to make it as gory as you want, but that it is not a crutch, right? That is
Mm-hmm.
not something that you just depend on. I'm only gore and that's it. We have the best gore shaders of all time. Our tech team only worked on the gore, like it jiggles just perfectly as you walk down the hallway. It works, right, but again, there's a lot more tenants that you need to like rely on to
Hmm.
keep it going. Yeah, no problem with it at all, Josh. What about you?
Yeah. I think again it has to be used sparingly. It has to be used right. Like if it's just so extreme that it's almost comical. Like if you look at something like
Yeah,
Evil Dead or Evil Dead 2,
yeah,
that we saw that kind of push into more like comedy horror. And there's
yeah.
like you were talking about earlier about comedy being hard. How about comedy horror, as we
Horror,
saw with
comedy
Army of
horror,
Darkness there. That
comedy horror Metrovania.
there we go. Someone get to work on that one. That if you put it so over the top that it just kind of distracts from the rest of the game, then I think it doesn't quite work. Let's see, visual make harm again.
Yeah,
And I think,
perspective.
and again, like Darkwood, I like the game, and yeah, like again, like it's that same issue of what kind of gameplay you're trying to instill in the player. I enjoyed it, but again, it can still be a very hard game to get into. And to Chris's comment about that you are the character in the game, that I think is another issue that we see with a lot of indie horror, and or just a horror in general. That we need to care about the character and characters at play. When we look at something like
Yeah,
Gone Home, it's about what's going on with this family. Where did everyone go?
yeah, yeah.
Silent Hill with was it James Sunderland and
The,
Harry
the
Mason?
daughter.
Yep,
Yeah, the daughter. Yeah.
we need to care about these characters. Alan Wake with, well, Alan Wake would be another example. But I see this from a lot in the horror where and this is something I mentioned in my post, that you're either playing as you, or you're playing a character who has no personality, never says anything, never even like responds, like, oh, this guy's head just got ripped off and it turned into a spider. And your main character's like that.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yep, and yeah, like with Darkwood, and again with the challenge of this gameplay is that you have to create, and you have to have set limitations. But at the same time, limitations can't feel annoying, or they can't feel like the developers just saying, "Here's 27 guns, can't use any of them. Here's 5 butcher cleavers, can't use any of them." The enemy can hear you from 80 feet away if you take a step at the wrong time. Speaking about difficulty, and actually, as a quick time check, we are over an hour, so I would say maybe another 10 to 15 minutes. Does that work for
Yeah,
you?
that's
Um,
fine.
Before we talk about kind of like difficulty in horror, any other topics that we in touch that you want to bring up?
No, I think we covered everything so far. Let's keep going.
Okay, so one of the
Dead by
biggest,
Dead
yeah,
by Daylight, scary or goofy?
I think it's more goofy at this point.
Goofy, goofy. Yeah, they jumped the shark, and the more they went on, they jumped the shark. So
Oh yes. So one other point that I want to bring up about horror, especially this is kind of what we talk about when we see like the modern state of indie horror, is this push towards difficulty, where now it's not just you can't attack an enemy. It's okay, this enemy is constantly stalking you, they can hear you from a mile away, and if they spot you they are going to run like a track star
yeah,
to get to you. And this is again like when we go back to Alien Isolation, I think this is kind of like Alien Isolation taking the long way around.
or Resident Evil Nemesis. Was it Nemesis, the one where the dude
Yes.
and he chases you the whole time?
Yeah. Resident Evil
Yeah,
2 had that with Mr. X, but in the
Mr.
original
X.
version, that
Yeah,
was the bonus loop. In Resident Evil
yeah,
2 Remake, he was just there right from the start.
right.
And this is when we get to kind of the other aspect of kind of modern horror, and that is extreme difficulty. And this is again, when we look at stuff like the Puppet Combo games, they are masters when it comes to difficult horror. Where, hey, you're trying to solve this puzzle, but you accidentally drop this item. Well, they heard you over there, now they're gonna come running. and then you need to get back to the puzzle. You leave them, but oh wait, now they come back again, so you need to run. Oh, and did we mention that every room has cabinets and drawers and 47 shelves you have to look at, and all the items are randomly shuffled. So I hope you enjoy opening up the same drawer asset for the first 10 minutes.
Yeah, definitely. But that's like pure horror, though, Josh.
Mm
You describe pure horror.
hmm.
Yeah, sounds like something I'd refund fast. Yeah.
Yeah. And extreme difficulty, this is something that I feel doesn't quite work with horror. The Chilea's art, those kinds of like Japanese horror, I think, are another example of this, where you have limited inventory space and the enemy spots you, you're just going to get murdered, or you have to run like 30 feet away and, completely forget where you were. Yeah, the instant fail death states of a lot of indie horror being an
Talk
example
about
of this.
annoyance, right? We brought up annoyance earlier,
Mm-hmm.
like insta fail states when you didn't even know, like you accidentally dropped a paperclip and you're dead. Like that's not super fun, right? So
Yep.
yeah, I mean, no one's a fan of like jump scares or insta fails, and I think like in any game, any type of game.
Yeah.
So
And to Chris, I hope you brought your 10 copies of the book that I'm sure you bought from the publisher.
yeah,
Just give them like 9 of those copies and then buy another 9 more.
that's right,
That'll
Chris.
get them into it. Yep. And yeah, like Insta Fail is very frustrating. Again, it's kind of the opposite of the hide and seek approach, where you can't really do, like in some games you can't do a damn thing, and then there are games where the second you try and do something, boom, it's all over. That was my major failing with Amnesia. That the first time the enemy catches you, it's like, oh, it's scary. They run out of the dark, but then it's like, okay, so anytime the enemy hits me, I'm basically done. Like there's
Yeah.
literally nothing I can do. Then it's just like it stops again. Like it's when the game becomes formulaic that,
Yes.
oh no, that ghost saw me, I'm instantly dead. Well, that's the same result every single time. Whereas with a lot of survival horror, it's can I fight back? Can I
Yeah.
try and survive this?
Yeah, you need some way to come back, right? It's not like
Mm-hmm.
just instant bop, you're gone. Like, how about let me bop back, right? Give me a chance to defend myself. And
Mm-hmm.
that, well, you can, with that, like, you can create more tension and you can at least not annoy the player and push your player base away.
Yeah. And you want to again like give the player that choice of fight or flight. And it has to be a choice that they make, not the
Yeah.
game telling you, "Oh, this is the you must run away section. This is a section where you're forced to fight." Now you're forced to run away. And I remember again, like how many indie horror games have we played where all of a sudden you're put into like that forced chase sequence where you must run and oh, you went left instead of right without knowing that, the box just happens to fall down on this side. Well, now you're dead. Do the whole thing over again.
Right. Yeah. Definitely becoming very formulaic.
And it becomes very frustrating when it's just all event triggers at that point.
Yeah.
Where it is just this sense of, okay, I walk into the room, the window, opens, the fan starts spinning, and I know the ghost is going to be over there. And then I walk 5 steps, pick up the item. Oh, wait, now the music's starting to play. The ghost is going to be right over there. And I've said this before, it's when it feels more like a haunted house instead of a horror
Yeah.
game, is when you lose me.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing. Like you can just okay, jingle, jangle, this and that, and then that does not make a horror game at all. You know
And
what I mean? Go ahead.
I was going to say, and this is why, again, everyone is so excited about the new Silent Hill 2 game from Bluebird Team. Like, Layers of Fear is one of those games that, again, it's like, I play as, like, it's okay, but, like, there are some people who, like, they, like, found it to be, like, this renaissance experience when it came to horror. I just don't understand why.
Uh, with like when we were talking about like okay, so just basically when we're talking about like horror is psychological and like when things become formulaic, we were talking about like instead of giving away a jump, let's just say there's no jump scares or whatever, and you know, okay, this is this section, this is this.
Hmm.
You're no longer like subverting them or taking them long. They literally know, okay, I'm going to see a ghost now. I am going to see a thing now. Oh, great. Now I am stuck in this room. It's no longer it takes all of that away. And horror games are very susceptible to that, right? It's like really easy. They got a lot of traps they can fall into in that regard, for sure.
Hmm. And good luck with your phone call, Chris. And yeah, if you don't
Yeah.
come back, have a great rest of your night. Yep, and
Yeah.
again, it's that issue when it becomes almost like a paint within the
Haunted house.
lines, like a drawing book.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
this is the part where you can't do anything. This is the part where you have to hide and seek around. Now we
Yep.
have 10 minutes of just wandering around looking for items. Now the ghost comes back and you need to hide again. It just feels again like paint by numbers. That's why I wanted. That's what I was thinking about there.
Yeah.
That
By numbers, definitely.
it doesn't lead to interesting gameplay. And it's why, again, that games like Faith, like World of Horror, that a lot of like lo-fi games generally work out better because you don't know what's coming. You've never played a game like this. So you're going, and again, I think this is another major point about horror. You want the player to go in at zero. You don't want them to figure out, oh, this is just like a Silent Hill game, or this is just like a FNAF. You want the player to be guessing
Yeah.
what's going to happen. Because if you just say, oh, this is just like Layers of Fear, that kills all the fear you're trying to generate, because people know what's going to be happening in that.
Yeah. Key points. You want the player to work against themselves mentally and keep them guessing, right? Once like once the magic is gone or revealed or they know what it is, there's literally no reason to keep playing. Like you were talking about, I believe, in Outlast. Like once you found out, okay, well, there's just no point. Well, like you kind of like just give up and there's no reason to play. So
Yep. And that I think is a really good segue to kind of like my final point. And that is that horror, and one of the reasons why horror is so niche, is that it's really, in a lot of cases, a game you can only experience one time. That the first time you play a Resident Evil, a Silent Hill, whatever, you're going into that blind. It's why for a lot of people who play horror games, we generally don't watch other Let's Plays or watch other people play these games. We want to go in them as blind as we can. Because once you know that, behind that green door in the fifth room, there's going to be a killer with a chainsaw, it's gone. Like, you've lost that sense of tension. And it's why I feel that, getting back to my point earlier about roguelike design, that I feel like roguelike elements are a very key aspect of the future for horror. Not
definitely.
just shuffling around, what items, but again, shuffling around where the enemy can show up. Making it so that instead of having jump scares feeling the same thing,
Procedural horror.
yep, have the jump scares be emergent. Imagine an immersive sim jump scare
Yeah.
where literally you don't know where it's going to come from because it could be anywhere. Speaking of
And
which, Prey.
And a plus to that, right, is that your game would be like totally streamer friendly, right?
Hmm.
Like it wouldn't be the same jump scare every time, the same. You'd have
Hmm.
different ones, and it could keep playing and not be spoiled. So yeah, definitely, I think
Hmm.
procedural and horror would be great, really be good, and if used properly, that'd be like man, magic right there.
Yep, and again, like in terms of like developers, I'm surprised we haven't seen more people try and copy Prey's mimics. This
Yeah,
idea that literally any single item in the environment could come to life and jump at you and try to
cool.
take a bite out of you is kind of scary. And it's
Yeah,
a scare, as you just said, that is procedural. You don't know if, on this first playthrough that lamp's an enemy, or maybe it's that coffee cup, or even better yet, like imagine like a room where you hear like let's say emits some kind of noise, so you don't know what item is making it. So you're just like constantly walking, something going, okay, is it this tape dispenser, or maybe it's this desk, or maybe it's that tiny little pencil that also just gonna pop up and like
It's a
Becomes like a
stapler. It's a stapler, John.
turns into like an 8 foot tall creature with like 27 heads. Yeah, they put. Where did they put in the
If they
ground?
created that mechanic because of budget or restrictions, that's amazing. I love it.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, like having that sense of a procedural or emergent behavior, I think, is a very key aspect. One game that I've been hearing a lot about, I'm debating if I want to play, is Stay Out of the House. It's the late. It's not the latest game for Public Combo, but it's their latest game to come to Steam, and it kind of has like this immersive sim stealth like to it. And I think again, like we want the gameplay to match the pacing and the mood of the horror. It's why you want the player to. You don't want the mechanics to feel annoying, but you want them to make sense within that space.
Definitely.
Yeah, and yeah, to Pony's Con, that's another really good point. That it's not like I said earlier. It's not about the jump scare or the moment of scaring. It's about what's happening in between. That the first time you get the player with, let's say, random stapler attack, now they're going to be paranoid for the next 5 to 10 hours. That what happened? What about that desk chair? What about that trash can? Now you have them again second guessing themselves, and again, the player is their own worst enemy when it comes to horror, and that is something you need to exploit if you want to make a good horror game.
Definitely. And I guess if I'll just sum up with my final point, uh, for a horror game, level design is different than environment design. Level design is very, very important. You need to work on proper level design so that the players do not get lost, annoyed. Pacing is very important. Don't rely on jump scares. Jump scares don't work. No one likes them. They will uninstall your game. Study some psychology. Study, like really study it. See how you want to keep the player guessing. You want to subvert what they think. This is like one genre where you can like break rules and you can change things and it's okay. Because we are getting supernatural or we're getting demonic or whatever, however you want to play it, Lovecraftian, either way, right? So you can definitely go that way, and it's one of those genres that allows that. But yeah, definitely. So be unique, be creative, use sound, use audio, and don't rely on typical crutches.
Yep. Oh yeah, and to Pony's comment as well, like you want to avoid unnecessary health hazards in your game. Flashing lights, having like confuse. One of the things that annoys me is when you have like the kind of blurring or the screen gets all distorted, and better yet, super low frame rates. Like you don't
Yeah,
want to play a game that's like 5 frames per second. You move and it's
yeah,
like that. Like
yeah.
that just causes me migraine.
Suspense is if your computer is going to crash or not. That's the
There's the real survival horror. Will your computer blow up before the game is over?
right.
Oh yes. Oh yeah, we played several games like that. I remember that one Game Boy game, which was like this annoying noise. I just took my headset off. I was like, yeah, I don't need to listen to this.
Yeah,
I let the
definitely.
chat suffer there. I'm not listening to this music. I'll let you guys do that. Yet again, horror is about creating an atmosphere. It's about making the player feel unease. And it's incredibly hard to do that. It's why, again, that horror is a very difficult genre. Despite the many, many games in it, it's hard to do it right. Because at the end of the day, the very best horror game, in a way, is going to be a very niche game. But it's going to be one that a lot of people don't want to play. Again,
Yeah,
how many people want to sit down and say, you know what, I want to play a game that's going to give me a heart attack and I'll have nightmares for the next
nightmares.
week after I play
Yeah,
this game?
yeah. It's gonna mentally torment me. Let's go.
Mentally scar the player. Like that's what we all want out of our games. But I think with that, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to say last minute. Any topics from you?
No, I'm good. Make sure that follow common control schemes.
Mm-hmm. And bad UI is not scary. It's
Not
just
scary.
frustrating.
Yeah, that's right. Bad UI is not scary. No scare jump scares with UI, please.
Hmm. So, I think with that we talked about, horror. Oh yeah, and again, like horror and non-horror is its own unique topic, and again, it builds like just to like put a pin in it. It covers a lot of lessons that we've talked about over this episode. That's about putting the player in a position where they're not expecting it, and again, why stuff like Hat in Time works so well, or the Mario piano. That,
Yep.
and it's also why that stuff only works once. But when we have those sections, they're never repeated ever again. And when you can surprise a player like that, and if you can keep doing surprises like that in a horror game, you know you have something good. And I guess my final point: horror does not need to be overly difficult. It's again about the human and player psychology. You want the player to be, again, their own worst enemy. You don't want the game to be like the super punishing, oh, you use, 3 bullets accidentally during this one fight, but this boss needs exactly 38 bullets, and I only gave you, 38 bullets for this entire game. Well, now you've lost. That kind of difficulty.
Excellent. I think you summed it up perfectly, Josh. You
All
got it.
right. So, with that said, we're going to wrap up this week's episode. We're going to try and get some podcasts recorded soon now that everyone is hopefully feeling better. But if you are new, do the liking, subscribing, and commenting. If you want to know more about my thoughts on horror, be sure to pick up Game Design Deep Dive Horror, as I went through a whole mess of horror design and psychology in
At
it.
least 10 copies.
Yep. As
All right.
we have a jump scare. I'm leaving it in because it's the perfect end for the stream to have a jump scare sneeze.
Definitely. And as always, my links are down below. Follow me on Twitter, Wishlist Samurai Pig. Join Josh's Discord. Buy tons of books. And I think we're doing bad games next week.
Possibly,
Yeah.
yes. And you see, this is why I'm not scared by games anymore. I have jump scares in my own house. Lights can flicker on and off.
Yeah.
Weird. It's why video games don't scare me anymore. Real life is the scariest horror game of all.
Yeah. Yeah. You got to get out of real life.
Exactly. I need to get into I don't know. Let's get into Minecraft. Maybe that will
Yeah.
be safer.
It is kind of spooky.
Yeah. So we we will be back next Saturday around 5:30 or 5:20 ET. We're going to try and we'll see if we can get on time, but come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where it's in the art and science of games. Until our next stream, have a great Halloween.